All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the very first Utah Business Book Club. I'm Elle Griffin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Utah Business Magazine, and I am here today with Yancey Strickler, who is a former CEO of Kickstarter and also the author of This Could Be Our Future, the book we're all talking about today. And I'm also here with Tim Stay, who is the CEO of the Other Side Academy locally, and also Bassam Salem, the CEO of Atlas RTX. So we've got a good group here to talk about this book, and it is a pretty interesting one, so I'm excited to talk about it. For all of you that are joining us as attendees, there is a Zoom webinar chat on your right side. So if you have any questions, any comments, anything you want to contribute to the conversation, just go ahead and type it in there, and I'll be keeping track of that as we go, and we can incorporate that all in. So thank you and welcome. Okay, so I want to get started. For those of you that haven't read this book, you definitely should. It's This Could Be Our Future, a manifesto for a more generous world. And I mean, maybe Yancey, you should sum it up because you're going to do a better job than I would.
Sure. Hi. What's up, y'all? Nice to see everybody. Nice to see everyone. Hope everybody's doing good. You're safe. This Could Be Our Future. It's a book about our value systems, and it's a book that first explores how the profit motive became the dominant value system in our world today, and in a way that is dominant even beyond our ability to really perceive it. And I show how the belief in what I call financial maximization, that the right choice in any decision is whichever option makes the most money. I show how this hidden default came to be. And I theorize that it's about 50 years old, and that this is a mindset that has slowly normalized itself to where now we don't question it. We don't question its motivations. We don't question the rightness of its intellectual structure. And that also we're at a moment where that system is sort of breaking down. It has been very useful, but we're now reaching challenges like the climate crisis or COVID or social breakdowns that cannot be solved through more financial growth. Like maybe more financial growth is a part of a solution, but we cannot solve things solely by the pursuit of that one metric alone, which has really been the thesis of the last 30 years of government and corporate behavior. And so I introduced a new idea that I think meets and reflects the challenges of today. And that's like very practical and is based on my experience as an entrepreneur. And really thinking about folks like Tim and Bassam, and thinking like, just how is it that as people who are looking to start things, to push new enterprises into the world, I think it's too much to ask, how can it be easy to do the right thing? But how can we make it less difficult to do the right thing? How can we be better empowered to make good decisions and to not only create businesses that are sustainable, but that are also serving other purposes in our communities, which I think is a growing desire among entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think that super timely. And one of the things you mentioned in the book was I guess it was a project that UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute did, where incoming freshmen at college got to rank a number of factors that they deemed most important to them. And you highlight a couple of things that they said. In 1967, the goal that was most important to college freshmen was to develop a meaningful philosophy of life. And being well off financially was 7th. In 2016, being well off financially was 1st, and developing a meaningful philosophy of life was 8th. So that was super interesting, but also maybe not surprising. I don't know. What did you guys think, Bassam, Tim, when you read that?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, Yancey, I think that was one of the core questions that I was really curious to hear your thoughts on. Was there really a cultural shift 50 years ago? I mean, this country was, I'm an immigrant myself, as you now know, but this country was sort of based on this notion of free market capitalism and go make it happen and so on. Was that not always part of the core value system of this country, or do you really feel that something shifted in the 70s?
Yeah, I think that there was the free market was certainly always a part of the U.S., but I think it was always tied in with another story. You know, like during the Cold War, the period right before I'm talking about, the free market was tied into a notion of freedom and democracy, and really, I think at that moment, democracy, democratic capitalism, and communism were competing to see which could be the more dominant social system on the globe. And that was happening through the Cold War of nuclear standoff, but there was also a competition, a social competition to see which structure could produce the biggest middle class, which social structure could help the most people. And so the free market tied to that sort of binding itself to that sort of purpose is very powerful, right? And this is where you have businesses having very high tax rates and employees were employed for a long time and pay rates rose a lot. But then I think that additional narrative exited. And instead this narrative entered of, yes, free market capitalism plus greed is good, wealth is good, there's virtue in being wealth. And also more of life became unaffordable. And so people were then put into a position where they, what I see in the reflection of 82% of college students today saying being rich is essential is just the reality of that being not rich sucks. Being not rich sucks. It's been said, I think it was H.L. Mencken who said America is the place where the essentials, where the luxuries are cheap and the essentials are expensive, right? And so healthcare, education, housing, these things have gone sky high. But yes, we have cheap iPhones. And so I think that there is a rationality to the belief in wealth and the drive to become rich. There is some rationality there, but I think it's a system that is feeding upon itself, and that without another purpose, I think that just becomes a materialistic, selfish loop that I don't think has a real end game, is my belief. But your point is well taken. It's not like people woke up that day, but I think there was always these other narratives that were sort of pulling it. And I cut it out of the book, but I wrote a chapter about this and I tried to go back and theorize what were the defining narratives of America in past periods. It's the westward expansion, or it's fighting off the British. There's always this other thing, this other purpose that is tying the nation or breaking the nation at other periods. And I think during this period, it's just been wealth. It's just been maximization of wealth.
That's fantastic, and I loved your point around sort of the 30-year cycles, which really resonated with me, for multiple reasons. And for those of you who haven't read the book, Yancey's premise is that big changes, behavioral belief level changes take 30 years, sort of generations at a time, and it begs the question: is it something gradual and inevitable? Or is it something that we need to create cataclysmic reasons for it to change? What do we need to do to drive that change? Or does it just happen? Does it just happen because we get more and more, we progress, shall we say? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I love that point, and I think a lot about this. And we have to act. I think the actions take place. I think if we think of change as being say it's a 3-act play, that those 3 acts take about 30 years to go from start to end. But it requires moments of great discomfort. It requires a crisis. It requires conflict and things that in the moment feel like breaking. But with a longer view, you can see that they are breaking with the intention of repair and rebuilding. But they don't just happen on their own. I mean, I think looking at the confrontation around race that's happening in the United States right now, which is a conversation that America has successfully avoided having in any real way for many decades now. Maybe we've thought we've had it at various moments. The election of Barack Obama, thought, oh, this is like a closing of a conversation. There are different stories we've told ourselves. But there was more there. The action wasn't happening. And here it comes forward. So when I look at like these pushes and pulls of forces, I appreciate the role everyone's playing. I myself become an actor in some of these situations, but I try to see ourselves as being just the cast members of this larger struggle that, if successful, plays out in a certain way, but also requires me to be an ant in this certain moment for that to happen. But I don't know. I think I can't like scientifically defend this. There's a lot to cycle theory, but I think that there's this notion that we are actors in a play that does play out a certain way, right? Like each gear of an engine doesn't necessarily know what it's doing, but it is a part of, anyway.
That's great.
I'm thinking about this even in relation to the move to working from home right now, because even it was only in the 40s that people were campaigning to have a 5-day work week, and all the production managers were like, no, we can't do that, productivity will plummet, we need everybody to be here 6 days a week, and all these things. And now we think, oh, the 5-day work week is essential, and now we're starting to unravel and say, well, maybe we can all just work from home. And maybe the next generation, the next 30-year cycle, everybody will just be working from home, and we're the middle generation that's like still kind of attached to the old way, but kind of seeing the new way coming in.
Well, this period that we're all in right now is like a very, you can't say unprecedented, because of course everything has happened many times before, but certainly for those of us alive, to have such a seismic change, that is prolonged, that you're aware of while it's happening. Yes, there was 9/11. Clearly this is different. And now we're in a moment where I think we realize that all of our maps are no longer relevant. Most maps we've been using to guide our decisions, to think about how the world functions and it's going to function, are irrelevant. And it's my belief that COVID doesn't go away. Like I asked a friend of mine who's involved in research and a lot of the work around COVID, and I gave her my theory that I thought we were going to be in lockdown, intermittent lockdowns for about 2 years. And she told me I needed to adjust my expectations that there will never be any cure or vaccine, and that this is just always here for good. And so the more I think about it, I think that might be true. And so we're in a moment where we're like waiting for a return to normal, or whatever that is. We're waiting for someone else to tell us it's okay to go do something. But really, we have entered a different universe, and one where, because there is no map, like you're rewarded for boldness of vision, and in a period like this, what's really happened is that, excuse my language, but that the bullshit has stopped, right? All the things in our jobs that was bullshit, that was just like work you had to do work, all that stuff has just stopped because nobody has time anymore. And we all can recognize a lot of that work for what it is. And because everyone is searching for a map for how to move forward, and no one actually has it, what you end up is basically a post-permission society where everyone has permission to go forward and do something because no one knows anything. And I think that there's a lot of dark side to that as well. But I think that the degree of change that can and will happen in this moment, and the degree to which a kind of boldness of being willing to try to redefine something in a way that makes sense for this reality we're in now, I think that those things are gonna pan out pretty well, because I don't think normal is coming back, and maybe not ever. Yeah. So let's all just go cry or something. No, go ahead, Tim. What were you going to say, Tim?
I was going to say, you talked about this 30-year change, and I do feel there's some undercurrents that I felt building for quite a while when you talk to, those coming out of college, you talk to millennials, I get a sense from hiring people over the last 30, 40 years, there is more and more people say getting a paycheck isn't enough. I need to be involved in something meaningful. I need to be involved in making a difference. I want to find satisfaction, not just outside of employment, but with employment. I think we're seeing also corporate structures. I know you set up Kickstarter as a public benefit corporation. We're seeing other unique structures, in these benefit corporations. We're seeing a lot of corporations with really taking seriously their corporate responsibility, and a lot of nonprofits are saying, how do we become sustainable? That's a path that we at the Other Side Academy have made sure that we can control our own destiny by being not reliant on funders or government or outside money, but that we can do what's best because we are making a profit. And so I guess I've also been feeling kind of this groundswell of these movements that fit so much in line with your premise of saying this is where we need to change to.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point, Tim, and I totally agree. I just I came across a study recently. I can't remember who it was from, but it was pointing to a growing, and it might have been at like a plurality of entrepreneurs today cite like non-financial purpose, mission-driven purposes as the primary motivation for starting their businesses. So I think that is and it showed up the same study I cite in the book, showing the belief in financial and being rich growing. Over the past 10 years, there's been a growth of a new value called be a values entrepreneur, which is like people starting NGOs, activism. So I agree, there is that rise. And I also agree with you about people setting higher standards for what they want out of life. And I think that there's a defensible perspective that says that like we're on a path of pretty exponentially raising consciousness. The degree to which we're all aware of ourselves, I think the degree to which the internet has made us aware of shared experiences and asked us to like ask bigger questions, the way it's accelerated, say, meditation into being a very normal kind of thing. I think that our consciousness is like really growing, and we're sort of feeding off one another in interesting ways. And that I can even imagine that if we think of the internet turning us into our brains into a kind of a networked organism, I could easily imagine that our ability to create a growing collective consciousness, which I think is what our data is, what a lot of our systems and tools are, that the potential of that will just exponentially increase with time, and that. Yeah, I think that the degree to which people are more aware of what it means to be fulfilled, maybe at the same time as the internet has risen, I think those things are somewhat connected, and I think that's a positive sign for the future.
We had a comment from one of the participants. Russell Fisher said he was just visiting family in Italy, and they just kept giving and giving and giving of their company. And he was saying his brother and he were both had advanced degrees from elite schools in England and the US. And they were trying to push them on how that helps with business success and everything. And they were saying, why would that be our focus? Doing something meaningful itself is the driver.
Well, there's the great James Carse book, Finite versus Infinite Games, and it's the notion that we think of there are games that end, like a basketball game. There's a whistle that blows, the time is up. There are a small number of those defined games, and there's all the rest of life, like business and all these other things that are infinite games. They never end. And the notion of there ever being a trophy, where a moment where they give out trophies, that doesn't happen. And instead, success in an infinite game is just existence. It's being around. And so, that the Italian cooking school, that strikes me as having that sort of mindset. One thing I was really shaped by was moving to New York in 2000, there were still record stores everywhere. And I was a music guy, so I went to record stores all the time. And then Napster and digital music really happened. And then I watched all these record stores disappear. And what stood out to me was that the first record stores to go out of business were things like HMV and Tower and Virgin Megastore, like big box chains that were, had large storefronts, and they were chains that just happened to sell music. The ones that stuck around and are still around today were the jazz store, the classical store, the punk rock store, places that served a specific community. And those places were 100% certainly less profitable than the Virgins or Towers, but they were providing a distinct service of like community tastemaking, serving a niche. And because of that, they are still there while their former competitors are not. And so to me, that is a great example of what it actually means to succeed. And what's hard for those entrepreneurs is like every step of the way, especially if you are an ambitious person, maybe you are feeling unsuccessful. You're looking at everyone else trying things, innovating, whatever, like trying to grow. And maybe you feel that same desire yourself. But yet for some businesses, just staying true to that vision and being quite specific and stubborn about it is exactly what the path to success is.
Yeah, I like the reprioritization of not necessarily wealth as the goal. I think you even, when we talked a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, asserts that once your basic needs are met, then you look financial stability, then you're looking for community and self-actualization. One of the things you said that really stuck with me is you said, well, now we're stuck on phase 2. We're stuck on financial stability, only it's not financial stability anymore. We're stable. Now it's financial maximization. So it's not about being secure anymore. It's about growing your pile. And we're treating that second rung of the ladder as if it was the summit. And that really stuck with me because it's like, well, I mean, you look at the Forbes list every year, and like those people are like the most successful people according to our society. That's like what we use as a ranking system. What?
Well, I was going to say just, like what is the next rung above that financial stability? It is like community, right? It is a shared social contract. And all we have to do is to look around, for us Americans, to look around the US right now to see how bad our social contract is, right? Like we have become so me-oriented, so wealth-oriented that there's so little shared trust. And at a moment where we really have to come together and like defeat this thing altogether, you can't like have a pool with only a little bit of pee in it, right? Like everybody's got to do their part to make this thing stop. And we're unable to do it. And we look at Asian societies, we look at some European societies, and say, well, how are they able to do it? And we come up with all these reasons, they're more culturally prone, whatever. I think the answer is that they are more advanced. Because they are consciously thinking about the social space as being a critical part of their infrastructure. Like it's a critical part of the infrastructure. It's harder to get right, but it's critical. How can we not say at this moment that stuff is not important, and the fact that we are so broken in this way is not hugely detrimental to the lives of 125,000 Americans and counting? And so we get trapped. In like, we optimize the hell out of one metric, and you're crushing it, but you're missing the forest for the trees. That's the danger.
Well, there's no measurement. You can't say there's no Forbes list of I'm the most connected to my community.
Yeah, well, you got to create it. Somebody's got to create it. That's how these things change, right? It's norms, it's new. A thing I think about to show how values change is, one of like the most bedrock values in business today was like nowhere on the map 20 years ago. And that's the value of transparency. Transparency is like, it used to be super normal. Like GM would run ads that would just like advertise what they paid in taxes and the fact that they paid like a good amount of taxes in the 1950s because they wanted to show we're on Team America, right? And then, you know, especially the 70s, 80s, 90s, as I write about in the book, sort of this profit mentality took over. People started selling a lot more sizzle than steak. And eventually in the early 2000s, you run into Enron, WorldCom, a lot of tech startups that end up being BS. And you had this problem of what was corruption. What was corruption? People using obscure business metrics to create financial corruption. And so it was to such a degree that in like 2001, there was a poll showing that big business was the least trusted institution in America. Least trusted institutions, like 11% of Americans trusted big business because it was seen as corrupt. And so what happens in the wake of this? There became this new value that got championed called transparency. And transparency is like, and it's got expressed as a law through Sarbanes-Oxley. You know, there was like a legal expression of this, but it also became part of the business culture. And now companies, there is literally a Forbes ranking of like most transparent companies. The Wall Street Journal Best Companies list is driven a lot by how transparent companies are deemed to be. So this is like, we didn't think of this as being valuable before, but things got so rotten that the entire business community had to say, whoa, our reputation is hurting right now. We have to come out of this deficit. We have to prove that we deserve to be trusted. And so a new value gets elevated, and then people reorient their businesses. It becomes a thing that gets celebrated. There are incentives and rules built in. And so these kinds of flows and negotiations are happening all the time. All the time. We're in the midst of one right now, clearly with race, right? And all the ways that's going to play out. But these things are constantly in flux. And so my belief is that, like the granddaddy of them all, the financial primacy of our thinking, I believe that's also on the table. I believe that's also on the table. And I believe that our belief that our self-interest equals individualistic short-termism, I think that's also on the table. I think that's changeable, and I think that will change. But so these things are in flux, and they're especially in flux at moments where everyone agrees that there's some breakdown happening. You know, when just like things aren't working, that's when you start looking around. You're like, well, who's got a better idea? Does somebody know how to fix this thing? You know, and then you're just open. The rest of the time, you're just, you know, no, I got this. You know, I'm driving. But then in some moments, there's this breakdown, and so we're mass breakdown now. And yeah. Hi, what's up?
So I hope this doesn't get too dark, but I'd love your thoughts on this, because I love your premise that change requires action. I think that makes sense, and that we need to make that action happen. What about really material change like the race situation we have today? Do we appeal to your us dimension on the bento box? Do we appeal to fairness and community and awareness and knowledge? Or could it be the case that real material change may require appealing to the me dimension? And this is sort of getting at the, you know, I think some in America might say we've been fighting this for hundreds of years. And in the 60s, we rose up to try to make something happen, and it hasn't materialized yet. Do we continue appealing to the us dimension, or do we need to get real change to happen, appeal to the me? And again, this is it's sort of a tough topic, but I think one we have to tackle. You know? Oh,
totally. It's you know, it's one of the most important conversations we can have. You know, there's a group called the Bento Society. So I run like weekly workshops on Zoom, 3 a week, that are all free and open. You go to bentoism.org. You can like sign up from the events page. But we have a Slack group where we talk, and we've been having a big Slack conversation about this, about the question of race and the bento. And like there's two things that I think are important. One is that you know, what's happening in the moment of like a large coalition of people coming out to support Black Lives Matter protests, and Mitt Romney coming out for Black Lives Matter, is that more and more white people are willing and are outwardly declaring Black Americans to be a part of their us. And in reality, that wasn't happening before, right? Like it really was the us and them. And for some people, it really is an us and them, like an antagonistic us and them. But like Martin Luther King in his letter from jail in Montgomery talks about how like it's the moderate liberals that or moderate whites that he's come to see as being the biggest problem, people who are just willing to watch something happen and just think it doesn't relate to me. So we are expanding the us in this moment. So I think that is the positive change.
Yeah.
The real deep change requires us to add two bentos to the left, which is past me and past us. And a lot of what I talk about is trying to create coherence in our lives, to make decisions and to live lives in such a way that like all dimensions of the bento kind of light up together. And that this is when we're at our best. But for something like centuries of oppression, there's a need to make the past coherent with now and the future, right? Like that, you can't ignore that. You can't ask a Black man or a Black woman who demographically, going by any number, like owns nothing of this country, likely has very little wealth, has whatever, and then says, okay, from now into the future, do it. It's just, it will be the same story. It'll be the same story. And so the challenging question then is how to make the past and the now, how to bring those things together. And I don't think that's impossible. I think that might be beyond our country at this moment. Is it beyond our country after, more pain and trauma? Possibly not. It was the Civil War before that forced a formal expression of the wrongness of this. That's what it took last time. I don't know that it takes anything less than that for it to happen again. Or it could be in the same way that relationships are so defined by how they begin. You're so defined by how they start. If you start dating someone and it's weird or sloppy to start, it's hard to get out of that. I've been there. You get trapped by that. You just this culture gets set early on and it's really hard to break out of it. And this has been a part of the United States' culture from the very beginning. And it is an original sin kind of thing. And what one does with that, I don't know. I don't know. But I certainly feel so proud, initially feeling terrified and horrified, and then ultimately feeling proud to see how many people were willing to step up and use their voice, and feeling like this is a really meaningful thing. And this is a real genuine expression of emotion and desire, and that it hasn't been here in a long time, and that you cannot discount, and that you cannot underestimate. And and really seeing someone like Mitt out there and just does so much. And you want to see everybody out there, right? You want this to be a moment where everybody is out there. And maybe we get there. So anyway, so I think it's expanding of us. That's us. That's not a them. That's us. That's me. Rodney King is me. That's not that poor Black guy. That is me. It's getting there. And then it's just recognizing and asking everybody to just move forward as if the past didn't happen, that just isn't going to work. Now, I don't know what the answer is. But I know that that's not going to work,
Your point about, do we become, again, I'm trying to hit on this because I'm struggling with it personally. Does it need to get painful for change to happen? Can't we just empathetically figure this out? Can't we just intellectually figure it out? As you think about countries in Africa that are ex-colonies of England or France or Portugal, the US, strictly speaking, ex-colony of England. Do you go and negotiate with England and eventually England, and talk about us and what's right for us and what's fair and what's community centric? Or do you have to beat up England? With all due respect to any English people here, right?
Well, I think
why can't we do it without war? Why can't we do it without violence, right?
I think in 50 years, the world's either going to have like 20 countries or like 20,000 countries. That, there are going to be two possible answers to this. One answer is going to be, countries and societies get aggregated. You get rolled up, China just rolls up countries, rolls up in a infrastructure and providing services, providing protection. What the U.S. has done, the U.S. is a roll-up aggregator of a lot of the world, right? But that empire's gone. So like there's that path of like countries, and it's just everyone gets rolled up into something else. The other path is everyone wants the right of self-determination, and that everyone becomes an independent state because the need for bespoke value systems, the need to express your individual cultural histories, the need to preserve and protect yourself from larger hegemonies, that is seen as what's valuable. And so instead, what you get is a mass sort of balkanization and separatism. And I see both as being equally plausible, and maybe they both happen. Maybe the balkanization happens, and then the roll-up happens after everyone's weak and small. But I could just see how we're going to be driven by how many people don't feel represented by the U.S. government at this moment. As borders go up between states, like at what point does self-governance take on a different meaning? And if we play that out over the course of 5 years, where does that go? And what does that? And how do we imagine that in Catalan? How do we imagine that in British Columbia? How do we imagine that in Montreal or Quebec? Places that have already had that attitude in the past. So I don't know, I could see that being a way that we respond. It's like more micro communities or very specific cultural definitions of ourselves.
If I could humbly make a bet, I'm going to bet on the smaller number, not the bigger number. The sort of macro trend historically that societies, humans, have gone from tribes to city states to nation states to now empires. If anything, it's almost as if we have the East versus the West, and you align with one or the other, and you have to have Big Brother to take care of you. It would be great, wouldn't it, if we could have more autonomy and sort of local communities that could have. I just wonder if that's really in the cards, without some significant macro.
The United Kingdom decided to sign up to be the B in the A/B test of what that looks like. So we'll see. We'll see.
I mean, I don't know. Sometimes, though, I wonder if we're just going to split into two countries, Democrat and Republican, the way things are going right now.
Already happened. I mean, I think it's a book I cite in the footnotes, but there's a amazing book by an economist, a German economist in the 1970s. It's called Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered. And he was like the CFO for the British Coal Board. And he wrote this amazing book about sort of advocating for, it's kind of the resilience of small systems, small communities. And one of his big points is to really argue against geographic density and to show all the problems that happens of like cities becoming so big and misuse of land and the power that goes to certain cities, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing, and it's a very powerful argument that, seems pretty limp in the face of like a very urbanizing world. But in a post-COVID universe, it does make me think about a redistribution of the population among space. Actually, if I were to think about this person's theories, would argue that it does a lot for our resiliency, for our ability to care for the land, for our ability to have better governance, for people to be, more locally invested in where they are. Those are all things that might happen in a world where we sort of disperse again. Climate change is also going to force that kind of dispersal, but obviously in a much more erratic, refugee-like way. But I don't know. That's something I keep thinking about.
That's great.
I'm kind of curious, Tim, what you would have to think about this, because not only is your organization very transparent, the point earlier, but you also have a small community, and you guys very much function like a community. It's kind of an interesting humanity experiment. So I'm kind of interested to hear what you guys think.
Well, one of the things that we've really believes very strongly is that homelessness is a function of disconnection. Addiction is a form of disconnection, and part of the healing that requires is learning how to become part of a community. So we start with a micro community, you know, 100 students working together, learning how to live together, learning how to, you know, deal with all the hassles of everyday life. And we've got people from, you know, various gangs and various races who were before in prison sworn to kill each other, all living together. And we haven't had one, in the 5 years we've been around, we haven't had one issue of violence or any threats of violence. One of the quotes that you have in your book, Yancey, that don't hate the player, hate the game, really rang true to me, that in, you know, a lot of our challenges with society, with race relations, it's a lot of them are structural. And I think this is an excellent time to say, let's look at some of those structural issues. You know, we've asked, certainly there's some police who are racist and bigoted, and what we saw with George Floyd was horrific. But there's a lot of what we're asking of the police are structural problems. You know, the decision to decimate the mental health you know, facilities over the last 20 years, the burden that we place upon police departments with dealing with, you know, most of the interactions the homeless have are with police. They're not with you know, the many providers out there. The police have become the front line in so many of these social problems that's part of the structural problems that we need to address. And so we're trying to help our students say, we understand that there are biases and prejudices. You know, you're going to see biases because you're ex-cons. You're going to see biases because you're ex-addicts. You're going to see biases because of your race or your sexual orientation. And there are ways to still succeed and live a productive life, even though you're facing those biases out in the community.
Yeah, I know that I interviewed a couple of your students at one time. I thought it was really interesting how they were saying that they did define themselves based on things before they came to the academy, like how many times you went to jail or to prison was like a positive thing that you used to like,
Yeah, a badge, yeah.
yeah, how bad you are, and how like whatever, there's a like kind of gang mentality about that. And how the first thing that they do when they come to you is they have to remove all piercings, they have to wear the same t-shirt, they have to remove anything that they're not allowed to talk about their past at all. And I found that like very interesting, because then when they were talking to me about it, they're like, yeah, then I had to decide like, who am I as a person? And instead of like, what are all those things that defined me in the past? And that's super interesting. It's almost like we're kind of going through that as a country now, like being the past that happened, what are we going to redo now? Like, how can we redo this?
That's amazing. That's amazing. I'm reminded there's when I do the bento workshops, one of the things I have people do is I have them draw a picture of their life, draw a map of their life, and you start with the bottom of the page and you sort of draw a sneaking line up at the top. The bottom is birth and the top is now, and you take 5 to 10 minutes and you just write down all the points in your life that stand out, and if you want to illustrate them to communicate a feeling about that time, or just like express high school is just a sad face or something, you can do that. But you just sort of draw that out. And then after doing that, I ask people to reflect on it, and reflect on what they're most proud of from their life. And what often happens, it's what happened with me when I first tried this exercise, is that normally we think of maybe those sort of extrinsic goals, like a career achievement or something like that, as like the defining thing. Oh, I am, I was all state whatever, and that's the defining thing. And actually, when you look, it's like, oh, it was that I had the, courage after getting sick when I was 10, to go out and do this, even though I was told no. And it was like knowing I did that one thing is really what unlocked everything else for me. And it just lets you write a deeper story, and one that's based less on the thing that's most visible and more based on when you could just sort of see that turning point in your life where you're like, actually, you know what, I deviated from my expected script for the first time at this moment. And, but those ways of letting people, just redefining themselves just through reflection, I think is really powerful, because we operate our best when we are coherent, when we're acting in integrity with who we are. But who we are is of course just a story we tell ourselves. And it's possible for those stories to be rewritten and to really change. And so I love that, Tim. That's great.
I also kind of want to talk about the GDP thing, because I thought that was fascinating. We use it as a barometer for our country, but you talk about in the book, it's just tracking how much we spend, not on why it's spent. So, as you say, the GDP, you could spend $1,000 on a family vacation or $1,000 on a divorce attorney. It's still showing that we're successful. And so according to, I love this quote, you said, according to the GDP, the ideal citizen would drive an SUV, have cancer, get a divorce, and eat out every night for dinner. Then our GDP would skyrocket. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound so great. And I think all of us can look at that and say, that doesn't sound like a healthy country.
Unless you're a cancer doctor or a divorce attorney, again, then you're like, sign me up. Yeah.
So how do we measure the health of our country going forward?
Well, we're in a moment, a quite interesting moment of we're seeing how we measure our country change quite a bit. I mean, we still see the stock market and GDP as core. And of course, every day, one of the stories of this current moment is why our stock's still up at a moment where it feels like a kind of apocalypse for at least life as we used to know it. But that, the stock financial metric is now sitting alongside COVID cases, is now sitting alongside unemployment. I think eventually we'll sit alongside poverty and homelessness, which I think are probably things that will grow as a result of this. And so our dashboard is expanding in this crisis state, because it's saying that we cannot judge reality solely by the market metric, right? Maybe if you're a day trader, that's all you're doing, that is all you're really thinking about. But for most people, that is the spectrum of metrics that tells us what's going on in the world. And so, so GDP is one of those. And again, during this time where the free market lacked this other purpose, it was just like GDP, to the power of GDP was our goal. And now it's going to be GDP alongside public health, alongside employment, alongside housing. I think are going to be all this sort of mix of things that we're going to have to keep in the air at the same time. And so our hand is getting forced, and I ultimately think that technology and just our ability to observe and measure things without much effort and without getting in the way of people's activities is just going to allow us to generate new metrics and new ways of judging our behavior and creating value for one another. I saw just today an example of a startup that will loan you money based on your social media following, like how many Twitter followers you have, and it's like converting that to a cash advance. But it's like it's not they give your financial credit score; it's a social credit score as a way to make financial capital available to you. And so I think that we're just in a moment of those things opening up. And there's even a quote, I think I have the tab open, I'm going to read it. I saw this in Bloomberg. It's about a man named Jeff Ubben, who was an activist investor, very aggressive activist investor. And he quit his hedge fund, and he writes, companies as governed today with investors asking for more returns and more buybacks and so forth aren't working for society or nature. But I still have to prove that there's a return in investing, because otherwise, what are we doing here? Finance is done. Everybody's bought everything else with low cost debt. Everybody's maximized their margin. We've bought all of our shares. There's nothing here. There's nothing more to be gained. Every industry has just 3 players. There's nowhere else for us to go. And this is like a top activist investor, and he's announcing this along with announcing a new fund that will be funding like green tech projects, right? But this is this moment where we realize this ship of growing financial capital it's not worthless. This capital we can use for other things, but that the imperative, the challenge, what's interesting has changed. You know, it used to be that the world's bravest people would spend their lives like mapping the world's oceans and world's land. That was like the biggest challenge of the world. And then we mapped everything, and then they moved on to something else, right? Then the biggest challenge became whatever, the arts or scientists, something different. The money goal has been satisfied. We are reaching it. You know, there's a theory that I don't fully subscribe to, but I love it, called automated luxury communism. and the idea is that there is enough money in the world, it is just misallocated, and that if we powered AI, artificial AGI, artificial general intelligence, and set up the parameters for what like a quality of life was and what everyone should have, and then just automated it to redistribute goods and services to us based on its algorithmic ways, that we could have automated luxury communism. But that like these kinds of things are possible. But yeah, I found this quote to be amazing, and it echoes something I talk about in the book, which John Maynard Keynes talks about, which is that we would reach a point in society where the growth of money would no longer be important. And even something that Peter Drucker, the business guru, wrote about in a book called Post-Capitalist Society, where he predicted around 2020 that financial capital would no longer be the most important thing that companies try to create, but that it would be knowledge. Knowledge would be the new most valuable thing. And that this new society that we're moving in towards wouldn't be an anti-capitalist society, and that capitalism would still exist, it would still be the foundation, but all the challenges and the new efforts would be about building on values on top of capitalism. It's okay, we have the financial basis, but the next challenges are not ones to be solved by growing more wealth. They're to be solved by growing other forms of value. And that's the moment we're at. And like the smart people know it. The activist investor, I'm sure this guy's smart. I'm sure he's like made a lot of money, and he's seeing this and he's saying, hey, this is like, this race is run. This race is run. I want a new challenge. And I think that's what's going to enter the bloodstream in a bigger way.
You talk about Adam Smith and the invisible hand and the self-interest. A phrase that has come to my mind is that we're transforming, like you mentioned, where values, not financial maximization, are self-interest, but values are self-interest. And a phrase that came to mind is the invisible heart, that we really need to transition into where our value are what motivates us, and that's what our ultimate self-interest is, not just financial maximization.
We're there. It's happening. I mean, I think that we are evolving in such positive ways, and it's trauma that's forcing us to do it, right? I mean, none of this growth that's happening right now would be happening if it weren't for COVID. COVID has opened up so many things. My father has decided to retire after COVID because it made him realize he doesn't need his job the way he thought he needed his job to define himself, right? There's no way he would have had the introspection, the bravery to decide that without a world where things have opened up in this kind of way. So I think there's so much to be optimistic about. Now, at the same time, the crises we're facing are just stacked up, right? The folks in charge have kicked so many cans down the road. that now we've got a whole roadblock of them waiting for us. But like, that's just how high we got to jump. That's just what it takes to meet the challenge. And so boldness, real leadership, real visions of the future, real different ways of looking about the world are required, but they're out there. And they're out there from the left and right. They're out there all across the board. And so I think that this is the moment where there is that changeover. And so I think there's a lot of good ahead of us. Asterisk climate change. Asterisk at the moment we solve all of our social issues, the tsunami of climate change will rewrite everything once again. But I think we're on a good path, and I think we are becoming aware of what we're capable of. And I'm just fundamentally such an optimist about human beings. And I think we're all doing the best we can with what we know, with what our experiences have made available to us. And that our knowledge is increasing, and that our potential is increasing. And I don't think anybody's is too good for that, or is going to turn their back on that. I don't think politics are going to stop people from really doing that in a big way. And so, I remain an optimist.
Well, I'm curious then if we can make those changes, are we dependent on the rich to change the way those resources are allocated, or the business, or the government? Are we, since they're the ones that hold the financial picture that needs to be rerouted?
Yes.
Is that what we're dependent on?
Yeah, I think if you use the transparency example as a model, you could imagine there's there's first the public outcry, right? There's the public outcry phase. This is broken. We know what that phase is like. We have it every day now in our media environment. We have the public outcry phase, and then that turns into internal culture change, which is like businesses themselves adapt to these changes. I think that is really going to happen. See so many surveys of CEOs, business leaders saying like they know that ethical, non-financial values are a part of their job. Like they're not afraid of it. They accept it. The market has told them that is a part of your job. So I think business leaders are already there for the most part. And then it's just what ultimately becomes legislation that maybe sets a floor. So maybe whereas now businesses are expected to maximize financial value, maximize shareholder value, maybe there's a law change that raises the floor, that says, you must do so, but not to the detriment of these things. Maybe that becomes a way we think about it. So I think ultimately there will probably be a legal expression of a changing worldview. But I think what would be smart of the business community would be to be proactive and to set these standards on your own. Don't wait for regulators to do it to you. Take the driver's seat. Again, that's what smart folks are going to do. And so really try to define that. With Kickstarter, we became a PBC as our step. I don't think the answer is really going to be PBC. I think it's going to be more that mentality and expectation of a business just becomes the norm, and that the way C corporations are classified reflects that shifting norm. So I think that's going to happen, because I think companies are going to be stepping up even more in the coming years, because their employees are going to demand it. The market's going to demand it. A lot of things are going to ask that of them. So I think that shift happens. We just get these big moods together, right? And these big moods, they get expressed as cultural norms. And then if they get big enough, they get expressed as laws, or so there's a wave. And I think that the inequality of many of our structures now is going to force that to happen. Without, as Bassam said earlier, can you have these changes without violence or without conflict? I think we can look at our difference of a response to COVID and climate change to say whether or not conflict is helpful. Right? Climate change is just lulled us to sleep. It's just lulled us to sleep. COVID just woke us the hell up. Right? And it was a conflict. There was a moment. And so I think we need those. Otherwise, it's hard for us to change our behavior.
feel like I could talk to you about this for another hour. This is super fascinating, and I think this is kind of the philosophies we're all kind of thinking about right now. Is how do we, to your point, is it the CEO that says, okay, I don't need my $10 million a year pile, but my employees need healthcare and covered, or is it, how are we going to like start to make these decisions in our local communities? I think that's going to require a lot more thought. But I really appreciate you all taking the time to sit here with me and think about these things. They're big questions, and I think it's important as business leaders, as people with influence, that we can go forward and make the changes at our own levels. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Bassam. Thanks, Elle. It's great. Nice to be with you all. Thanks for coming.
It's an honor to be with you.
And thank you guys so much. All right.